Welcome to my video on solving quadratic equations by finding square roots. We are moving right along in this course, and if we look at the next slide here, before we look at the next slide, quadratic equations. Quadratic equations are typically in standard form. Standard form of quadratic equation will look like this. Ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. You can solve a quadratic equation for the variable x by using square roots when either b is 0 or b and c are both 0. The key is that b has to be 0 in order to do this finding square roots. So if we look, perfect squares, this is a suggestion that you need to have these memorized. These are some of the ones that are most commonly used. If you're able to get these memorized, you're able to make your work flow a lot smoother, and you're able to get your questions done more quickly. So if you need to pause the video and write those down, you do that. Or I'm sure you can figure out a way to calculate those on your own. Let's look here. We have 3 problems, and if we notice in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Well, in the top left, we have ax squared plus 0x plus 0 is equal to 36. B is 0, and in this case c is also 0. So that's the reason why we can solve this using square roots. All right, so if we look there, the x squared is equal to 36. Well, coming back here, which number multiplied by itself will give you 36? 6 will, right? Because 6 times 6 is going to be 36. Now, is that the only number multiplied by itself will give you 36? No. Negative 6. Because if you take negative 6 times negative 6, that's a negative times a negative, which makes the positive, and 6 times 6 is 36. So that's positive 36. So you have 2 answers there. Positive 6 and negative 6. Sometimes we write the answers as plus or minus. That's what that symbol stands for, plus or minus 6. Okay. Let's go over to the one on the right in green. X squared is equal to negative 36. Now, which number multiplied by itself will give you negative 36? Think about it. Which number multiplied by itself will give you negative 36? Let's run some numbers together here. Well, we know 6 times 6 is going to be 36. That's a positive. What about if I make that negative? Well, I don't have negative 6 squared because this number right here is positive. So if I'm squaring a number, I have to multiply it by itself. And in this case, if I have negative 6 times positive 6, I'm not multiplying negative 6 by itself. I'm multiplying negative 6 by positive 6. So in order to make that work, in order to say I have to multiply it by itself, I have to go negative 6 times negative 6. And what happens there? That would be positive 36 also. So I'm not really coming up with anything that equals negative 36 when you multiply it by itself. And that's why this is this is why in the course that we're working in right now, you will not work these solutions out. When you have to take, let's say, what's the opposite of squaring a number? It'll be square root. The opposite of squaring a number is taking the square root. And so the square root and the square cancel out, and we're only left with x on the right side. and x is equal to the square root of negative 36. Um, this one right here, the answer for you in this class is going to be no real roots. I know maybe growing up as a kid, or even sometimes you still believe in some imaginary things, and you think, oh, they're imaginary, they're not real. Well, that's true in mathematics. We have imaginary numbers, and they are not real. When you get to a more advanced course, probably your next course in algebra, you're going to say that the square root of negative 36 is going to be plus or minus 6i. And I stands for imaginary numbers. Like I told you, we have imaginary numbers in math, and that's going to be um, the numbers there, the imaginary numbers. But for this class, this is all I need you to know. This is all I need you to write down. If you have a negative, the square root of a negative number, you just write down no real roots. This right here, you'll come to this later. And just want to let you know that there are imaginary numbers. All right, so now we've covered the first example where you have two real roots. This one here where you have 0 real roots. And this one here, x squared equals 0. Well, what number multiplied by itself will give you 0? It'll be 0, right? And that's it. So the answer here is 0. X is 0, and that is one real root right there. So this is kind of a heads up. This is kind of a little start here. The important thing that I want you to notice is this right here, is when you, what do we do? Take the square root, cancel out the squaring in the square root, and you take the square root here of 36. So therefore, the square root of 36 is going to be a positive 6, and it's a negative 6. And this is one thing that many, many, many students will be forgetting, is that when you take the square root of a number, it's positive and it's negative. Now, a lot of times when you're doing word problems, if you're working out a word problem and you take the square root of a number, and sometimes the answer is only going to be positive, because if we talk about real life situations, sometimes you can only have positive answers in real life situations. But in the examples that I have here on the board, these are just math problems, and you're supposed to be coming up with all the solutions, and that would be a positive 6 and a negative 6, or you can say positive or negative 6 with the plus or minus sign. So let's get to working out some of these problems here. We go into a few more problems that are a little more advanced. Let me give you some vocabulary terms here. Most of the time, you're used to saying this symbol is the square root symbol, and that's the operation that we're doing. We're taking the square root of something. That symbol is actually called a radical. That is the radical symbol. Sounds like something from a TV show, right? That's pretty radical. If we look here, if we put a number under there, whether it's 36 or whether it's x to the 4th power, we call the numbers and the terms underneath the radical, we call those the radicand. So that's just some quick vocabulary terms there that you should know, because I will be using the term radical. I'll be using the term radical there for you. Radicand, I don't know if I use that a whole lot, but I can't remember using that a whole lot, but I do remember using radical. So keep that in mind. Radical is what you're probably typically used to referring to as the square root symbol. Okie dokie. We're going to get moving along here. If we look, we have 2x squared is equal to 50. This is just like solving equations that you've done before in algebra. The whole goal is to get the variable by itself or the unknown term by itself. If we're looking, we have 2 times x squared is equal to 50. Well, x is the unknown variable. You're trying to get it by itself. What is with the x? Well, 2 is with the x. So how are you going to get rid of that 2? The opposite of multiplying by 2, dividing by 2. The 2's cancel out. On the left side, I'm left with x squared. On the right side, what is 50 divided by 2? And now, what is this next step? If I have x squared, what is the opposite of squaring a number? The opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of the number. Take the square root of the number. So therefore, our next step, the square root and the squared, those are opposite operations. They cancel each other out. So the square root of x squared is going to be x. The square root of 25 is 5. Whoa, 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 whoa. You better slow down here. Think about it. When you take the square root of a number, you should also have a negative there. So x is equal to plus or minus 5. And if I take positive 5, plug it in there for x, I'm going to get 50 on the left side. If I take negative 5 and I plug it in there for x, I'm going to get 50 on the left side also. So this is very similar to solving equations like you've done before. The only thing different is the new method of getting x by itself, I guess you're learning here, is the opposite of squaring a number is taking the square root of it. This problem here is the same as in solving, the same as you're used to in solving. You just got to get d by itself. If you get d by itself, your order of operations look like this. Notice I put multiply and divide on the same level because you're supposed to do those from left to right. And addition and subtraction is on the same level because you're supposed to also do those from left to right. But when we solve, or when we're solving for a variable, we're supposed to work backwards through the order of operations. And in working backwards, we come to addition and subtraction first. Are we adding or subtracting anything to d? Well, we're multiplying it by 4, and then we add 300 to it. Well, right there, we add 300 to it. So how do we get rid of adding 300? What's the opposite of adding 300? Subtracting 300. Subtracting 300. 300 minus 300 cancels and gives us 0. So we drop down everything that we have left. 4d squared is equal to 700 minus 300, 400. So we've gotten rid of all the addition and subtraction. Now multiplication and division, this is where we're at now. We are multiplying d squared by 4, so the opposite of multiplying by 4 is what? Dividing by 4. If I divide the left side by 4, I have to divide the right side by 4. So the 4's cancel. I have d squared is equal to, what's 400 divided by 4? 400 divided by 4? 100. And now the exponents. How do we get rid of the exponents? We get rid of the exponent of squaring a number by, what's the opposite of squaring? Taking the square root. Taking the square root. So on the left side, the square root of d squared is going to leave us with d. And the square root of 100 is 10. 10 and negative 10. So d is equal to positive or negative 10. Let's try one more. I'll work out one more with you, and then I'll let you try a couple on your own. We're solving for a variable, so we're working backwards. You have to get rid of the addition and subtraction. We are multiplying by 3, and then we are subtracting 8. So the subtraction part is 8. What's the opposite of subtracting 8? We add 8, and we add 8. 40 plus 8 will give us 48. Drop down 3x squared. And negative 8 plus 8 cancels to make 0. So we've gotten rid of all the addition and subtraction. Looking there, multiplication and division. We're multiplying by 3, so the opposite of multiplying by 3 is to divide by 3. Divide both sides by 3. So 48 divided by 3 is 16. And so now we have 16 is equal to x squared. And we've gotten rid of multiplication and division. How do you get x by itself? Take the square root of both sides. And x should be equal to positive or negative 4, or positive and negative 4. And remember, you can take 4, plug it back in there for x, and you will get, on the right side of the equal sign, you'll get 40. And you can also then take negative 4, plug it in there, and you will get positive 40 also. All right, let's look at this next example here, and let's have you go ahead and try that one on your own. You pause the video, work it out, and then make sure your solution matches mine. I will go through the work quickly. All right, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So I'm left with 2x squared is equal to negative 2. I divide by 2 on both sides. So I'll get x squared is equal to negative 1. Yeah. And then what's the opposite of squaring a number? It's square root. So I get x is equal to the square root of negative 1. And that's going to be no real roots. No real roots. No real solutions. Go ahead and try this one on your own. Pause the video and I'll work it out. I want to add 54 to both sides. 6x squared is equal to 54. Divide by 6 on both sides. So x squared is equal to 9. Take the square root of both sides. X is equal to positive or negative, or positive and negative 3. Go ahead and try this one on your own. First step is to add 12 to both sides. 6k squared is equal to 12. Trying to get rid of the 6, so we divide both sides by 6. And What is wrong with that K? Oh, that one's not much better. K squared is equal to 2. You're going to take the square root of both sides, and so K oh my. All right, so K, how about ugly looking K? Man, I guess that's not ugly. It's beautiful to some people, right? K is going to be equal to positive and negative square root of 2. Most of you used to changing these to decimals. If you read your directions, if your directions say change it to a decimal, then you can give me an approximation, because the square root of 2 is, as a decimal, does not terminate and it does not repeat. It goes on and on forever. So therefore, that's why you're giving an approximation. But, and there's the approximation symbol, is what I just put on there. It looks like those two squiggly lines. But if they don't ask you for an approximation, if they don't ask you to round to the nearest tenth or the nearest hundredth, then just leave it as the square root of 2, plus or minus the square root of 2. And this is your exact answer. I know it may be new for you to leave things as the square root of 2, but that's okay. You're allowed to do that. K is equal to plus or minus square root of 2. We have just a couple more here. Let's have you go ahead and just work the rest of these out. Just get a good grasp on whether or not you're getting this, and how you're doing on it. Let's see if you can get things figured out. Go ahead and work this out on your own. Pause the video, and I'll work it out afterwards. First step, add 4. So you're going to get 14 is equal to 2a squared. You're trying to get a by itself, so you divide by 2. So a squared is equal to 7. How are you supposed to get a by itself? Take the square root of both sides. So a is equal to plus or minus the square root of 7. Square root of 7, or 7 is not a perfect square, so we'll just leave it like that. This one right here has a fraction in it. You still work it out the same way. If you feel comfortable enough, go ahead and work that out. If not, I'm going to be working it out in one moment. Oh, we're going to subtract 7. First step. So we are left with 1/2 x squared is equal to 32. So now we're trying to get rid of this fraction of 1/2. I understand that we are multiplying by 1/2, so most of you think the opposite operation of multiplying by 1/2 is dividing by 1/2, and that is correct. But remember, when you divide fractions, you are really multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'm just going to go ahead and save the step of dividing by 1/2, and we're just going to go ahead and multiply by the reciprocal. So what is the reciprocal of 1/2? That would be 2. And we're going to multiply by 2. And really, the 2's cancel out, and the 1's kind of cancel out if you want. And we're just left with the 1 in front of the x squared. If I multiplied the left side by 2, I have to multiply the right side by 2. And so therefore, I'm left with 64. How do you get x by itself? You take the square root. And so x is equal to plus or minus 8. There are two answers there. 8 is one answer, negative 8 is the other answer. Go ahead and work this one out. See what you can do here. I'll work it out in one moment. We're going want to minus 10 from both sides. 5n squared is equal to 10. Trying to get n by itself, so we divide both sides by 10, or I'm sorry, divide both sides by 5, and those cancel. So you're left with n squared is equal to 2. Take the square root of both. N will be equal to positive or negative 2. One answer is positive, and the other answer will be negative square root of 2. Go ahead and test your skills here. Pause the video, and I'll work it out in one moment for you. You're supposed to add 20 to both sides first. So we're left with 5x squared is equal to 125. Divide both sides by 5. And x squared is equal to 125 divided by 5. 25. And get x by itself. X is equal to 5. And it will also be equal to negative 5. Doesn't matter how you write the answer, as long as you have the correct answer. And one last one here for you. Go ahead and test this one out. Make sure you're doing good. Make sure you got it figured out. Make sure you don't have any questions. Try and get this clarified. If you do have questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Well, if I'm looking here at this problem here, I'm trying to get the x by itself, so I'm subtracting 3 from 4x squared. I know it doesn't look like subtracting 3, but commutative property allows us to rearrange those as saying 4x squared plus negative 3 or 4x squared minus 3. Same thing. So we have to get rid of that 3 first, and we add 3. Remember, we're supposed to be adding 3 to both sides of the equal sign, so we add 3 to both sides of the equal sign. So we're going to get 60. 57 plus 3 is going to be 60. Those 3's cancel, and we're left with 4x squared. Divide both sides by 4. 60 divided by 4, I believe, is 15. 15 is equal to x squared. So if 15 is equal to x squared, how do you get x by itself? Take the square root of both sides, and x will be equal to positive square root of 15 and negative square root of 15, plus or minus the square root of 15. Folks, that's all we have for today on solving quadratics by finding square roots. We will also, there's a few other ways to solving quadratics. This is the way that you'll probably do it if b is equal to 0. So if you have any questions here, let me know. I'll try and get those answered. If not, well, even if you do have questions, we will see you next time.